Courtney Vandersloot is Courtney Vandersloot. James K was in the building. He can tell us all about it. Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hi there and happy Monday to you. I am Howard Megdal, host of Locked On Women's Basketball. I want to thank you for making us your first listen every day. You can subscribe to us wherever you get podcasts. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel and you can watch us. You can see things like, oh, his beard, it's gone. What happened? Right? That's a whole other story. A lot of transactions this weekend in the WNBA front. But make sure you are listening to us every weekday. Some of the transactions include, for instance, Tina Charles also disappeared, reappearing. And we'll be getting to that on tomorrow's show, of course, with the great Em Adler and Alex Simon. But over the weekend, we had some fascinating times. You're going to read about them over at thenexthoops.com, where James K., who does such great work for us on the Skyhook podcast, which you should always be listening to, over at the Chicago Tribune. James, take me inside the feels of that building as Courtney Vandersloot hits a game-winning three-point shot to preserve an 88-85 victory.
Howard, she just keeps doing this. I mean, this is what her second buzzer beater game-winning shot of the season already. Like we saw it in New York a little while ago. It was incredible because the play wasn't even designed for Courtney Vandersloot to go and hit that three on the wing. This guy run this play all the time at the end of games where they have Allie Quigley inbounding the ball and they pass it out to the wing. It's usually Kalia Copper, who then gives the ball to Courtney Vandersloot. She drives towards the baseline. Candace Parker will set a hammer screen, or a big will set a hammer screen. And then Allie Quigley is just wide open in the corner. Well, the Lynx defended this so well with Mariah Jefferson really being able to stop Courtney Vandersloot from getting to the baseline. They overcommit to Emma Mieseman after Courtney Vandersloot passes her the ball. Courtney's wide open on the wing. The rest is history. I mean, big-time players make big-time plays, and that's exactly what Courtney Vandersloot is.
What is the Wintrust Arena experience like at this point? When we compare it to even just a few years ago, do you feel like, we're halfway through this season now, have the Sky been able to capitalize on this kind of success, this kind of star power, and has it changed the in-arena experience? I ask that because the move to Wintrust, in part, was talked about as a means to be able to do just that.
100%. Let's even compare it to even last year. The difference between the crowds this year and last year is just so vast, man. It is loud every single game. The Sky sold out their season tickets early on, and you can still see people coming to all the games. Yesterday they had 7,000 people. I mean, if I had to guess what their average was last year, it probably wasn't anywhere near that. And we're talking
31.87 last year, and this year the average so far, thank you across the timeline, 31.87 last year, 66.77 this year. So more than double what they were last year.
The Pride Parade was yesterday in Chicago, and they were competing with that. They were competing against it being Sunday night. They were competing against the Lynx not being one of the better teams in the league right now, where fans didn't have to show out to that game, and yet they did. And it just shows how much of a culture that they're building here in Chicago. And Wintrust, you can feel the energy every single night. It's deafening most nights. So it was incredible last night as well.
Beautiful to see it. It is what we need to see around the league, is building on success on the court by making sure you're converting it into off the court energy and quite frankly, just bottom line revenue coming in, which can and should be par for the course. But, you look, as you take a step back, I know you're working on a notebook piece for us, and make sure you go over, obviously, to thenexthoops.com and support what we're doing. It's $9 a month, $72 a year for over 100 reported pieces from our incredible staff every single month. Our recording of this got delayed by about 15 minutes because there were four different pieces that we were trying to figure out in real time across the staff, which is something that I love. A fire hose of the best kind. But to that end, I look again, and one of my go-tos is net rating. To see overall offensive rating, defensive rating. You subtract them out. What are we looking at in terms of the quality of offense and defense that's being put up? And we've checked in on this a couple of times. The Sky are now solidly in third place. They are at 6.1. They are one of only 6 teams with a positive net rating right now, and not that far away from the Aces, who they just beat. Let's not forget the other day. How big does that loom now? 13-4 for the Aces, 13-5 for the Sky. So right there with the Connecticut Sun, 13-6 with a net rating of 9.9. You've made the point previously on the podcasts here that you think Chicago has a really good argument for being the best team in the league when it's all said and done. Do you think you can argue that right now, given where they are in season-long metrics and the way they're playing of late?
They are the best team in the WNBA. The Aces, I watched the Aces probably the most outside of the Sky, and what I've seen from them over the last few games as well is just they look tired at the end of some of these games. They went to overtime the other night against Washington, and you could just tell it's like they're dragging along, not having Raquana Williams and not having a bench that they can really turn to for long stretches of time. And then you look at the Sky, who played Julie Allemon 20 minutes yesterday, where she had her best game of the season and can really, the way that she takes advantage of early offense just jumps out to me every time she plays. And she's just the perfect complement to Courtney Vandersloot when Courtney takes a seat. And the Sky are going to have fresh legs in the playoffs now. And you can see it every game, how they're able to just take advantage of the cohesiveness that they have and also knowing when to spell their players sometime. And it's important for a team that's as old as the Sky are right now.
It's fascinating. Becky Hammon came from the San Antonio Spurs. Well, and we'll talk a little bit about there's this men's league, the NBA, and we'll reference it in a little while. But the Spurs pioneered this stuff about load management, about minutes, and watching it. I still remember I did a story years ago, and it was comparing Oklahoma City and the Thunder to the San Antonio Spurs and the way they were doing things on rest. And Popovich was talking about the sports science and everything that was being told. And Scotty Brooks said, look, I know I have to play my best players the most, and I'm going to make sure I play Kevin Durant as often as possible. And I don't know if you've noticed, but Scotty Brooks is no longer the coach of the Oklahoma City Thunder, and Kevin Durant is no longer playing in Oklahoma City. So, there's something to be said for it. And I use that as context because Becky Hammon now in Las Vegas getting a ton of credit, and rightly so, best offense in terms of offensive efficiency. But you just go through Kelsey Plum, 34.5 minutes per game. Jackie Young, 34.5 minutes per game. That's a ton. Dearica Hamby's at 30.9. Asia Wilson's at 30. Chelsea Gray's at 29.9. I love this. Chelsea Gray, 5th in minutes played on the Vegas Aces, would be first among the Chicago Sky, where Kalia Copper and Emma Meesman are at 29.2. That cannot be an accident. And the fact that they're all bunched up right there, but below 30, 29.2 for Copper, 29.2 Meesman, 28.6 for Candace Parker, and 26.9, 26.3 for Vanderquigs, respectively. That tells me that 30 feels like a ceiling for what James Wade and the Chicago Sky have in mind. Is that how you see it as well?
Absolutely. Courtney Vandersloot told me she doesn't want to play more than 30 minutes a game, or average over 30 minutes a game. And it makes sense. She's been managing a foot injury. I want to put that to rest too, and because I think I've brought that up a couple of times. She looks great. I don't think that injuries are stopping her from being one of the best guards in the league. I know all-star voting might say otherwise, but we know how the reality that some voters don't actually watch all these games. So Courtney Vandersloot played 16 minutes against the Sparks the other night, where they can just dominate teams early on, and they can just, go to the bench a little bit earlier. I mean, we saw a lineup yesterday of Julie Alleman, Dana Evans, and Rebecca Gardner going 1 through 3. They're playing around with that. They hadn't practiced that lineup before yesterday, but they can do these type of things. They have so much depth where you can experiment and tinker in game that you can let Courtney Vandersloot. I mean, she was probably the most important player on the court yesterday for the Sky. She played 29 minutes and still put up 18, 5, and 6. She didn't look tired at all at any point during the game yesterday. And there have been times over the last couple of years where you see the Sky kind of, the energy isn't as high at the end of the game just because they've been playing so much. And it's just been a completely different team this year. I mean, this is the strongest I've seen the Sky since I started covering them in 2018.
And so I want to talk about the flip side of that, which is the bench. And we're also going to get into Candace Parker as well, a young up-and-coming player who I think has a chance to be great. But I first want to talk about Rock Auto because this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. There's an ever-increasing numbers of make and models when it comes to cars. So it's almost impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on the computer? You could just order the parts in their computer. Where? rockauto.com. And you're not paying a markup. You can make sure it's exactly the part that you need. So go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. So to return to your point about how they're using the bench, right? Rebecca Gardner, 17 games played, averaging 22.4 minutes a game. Azurá Stevens, 17 games played, averaging 21.9 minutes. And they got Dana, Julie, are both north of 14. And I use those numbers very clearly to illustrate the following. Las Vegas has one player who has been there for a preponderance of the games and is averaging more than 15 minutes per game off the bench, and it's Teresa Plaisance at 16.6. Tia Stotts is at 13.2. Everyone else is in single digits. Now, Verquana Williams, presumably, when she comes back, is going to be a part of that, but you got to see her back and see her healthy. Ileana Rupert has a chance to be. She's played one game so far. But the reason I say that is it's not just a question of keeping your best players fresh. We are a month and a half from the playoffs, and Chicago feels set up to be able to get critical minutes from their bench and critical contributions in a way that Las Vegas really doesn't at this point. Is that how you see that as part of the reason why there's separation between these two?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why when the Sky were mounting that comeback, I wasn't sure that was actually going to happen, just because I thought, okay, Vegas was able to go to the bench earlier than they usually go to it, and they were going to spell their starters some minutes there. It just ended up being completely the opposite, where then the Sky really put on the pressure the second and third quarter. And, I just think about in a 5-game playoff series, can the Aces beat the Sky 3 times? I would bet no, because they're you know what they're going to bring you every time out there on the floor, because they only play 5 to 6 players a game, so it is going to be really interesting just to see how those two match up later on in the season. But yeah, the Sky go 11 deep if they want to. I think Lee Yarou is someone that we might see get some more minutes in the playoffs when they play a bigger front court in, let's just take Connecticut, for example. The Sky, you look at everyone on the roster and everyone has a role, and they know how to maximize the talent of each of those players. Dana Evans can be a heat check player for you. Julie Alleman can push pace for you in the second unit. Azurá Stevens can be a starter in this league. She is the 6th starter on this team. She is the person when Candace or MM need rest. They can put Azurá Stevens in, and they can just continue to run the same type of offense that they have. It's just, this is a well-oiled machine. And when I look at the rest of the W, all these other teams have more questions to answer than the Sky do at this point. Let me throw this to you. What do you have any concerns about the Sky right now? What do you think would be the biggest one if if anything comes to mind.
The biggest concern I have for the Chicago Sky is just that they have a number of veterans and keeping them healthy, and which is to
Yeah.
say that you can have the best laid plans, and it still comes down to injuries can come up, or players can be more limited at critical times, and they have a number of players north of 30 where that would be, if not catastrophic, for the kind of depth they have. I mean, potentially problematic. But even still, I think they've done all they can do. That's essentially out of your hands. You can protect them. You can limit their minutes. You can make sure that they're as rested as possible while also making sure that you get the right seating. And I do think that's worth noting, by the way,
Yes.
that, if you take a look, and I was looking at this, and I do just want to, we have our share of complaints about the league and things they do or don't do. But I'm thrilled beyond belief that they have adjusted their playoff format, that there is no one and done, that we're getting series from the start. I love that we're going to a straight 1-8, 2-7, 3-6, 4-5 playoff formatting. But what does that mean in practical terms? You look at it right now. I know I said there were 6 teams with a positive net rating. Dallas at 9 and 10 is just barely hanging on to that 1.0. We have a lot of Dallas questions. By the way, make sure you check out. We're going to have a call to action over on social. Ari Graham, who does a great job covering the Dallas Wings for us at thenexthoops.com, is going to be doing a mailbag this week. So if you have Dallas Wings questions, make sure you send them her way at WNBA Love, which is obviously an elite Twitter handle. But what does that mean in practical terms, right? Well, if you're the 4, oh my God, you got to face the Washington Mystics and Elena Deladon in round 1. But if you're the 3, you get the Dallas Wings in round 1. Well, that seems like a pretty big difference. 7 and 8 are right now New York and Atlanta. LA's there at the 9 spot. I guess Phoenix is hanging on. Let's not rule out the Minnesota Lynx, who figure stuff out and have, the brilliant basketball mind of Cheryl Reeve at the helm. So you never rule them out until they're officially eliminated. Indiana, I'm sure, is perfectly happy to continue to show incremental growth and hold on to that lottery pick, but that's a whole other story. Bottom line is, staying in the top 3 is a very big deal this time around. And so they can't just rest folks and hope for that to work out. They need to make sure that they're staying in that top 3. It's a balance. And I feel like, as well as any other WNBA team, they're striking that balance. I think in answer to, there are fewer questions. Connecticut doesn't have a lot of questions in my mind. I think they definitely are down a level without Jasmine Thomas, as expected. Natisha Heidemann is a very solid point guard for them, but that, asking to live up to Jasmine Thomas is asking a lot. She is, in a lot of ways, the beating heart of that team. But yeah, I think there's a very good argument for them having fewer questions and a clear path right now. It'll help, though, to be 1 or 2 or 3. Somebody that 4-5. Right now it's Seattle versus DC. I mean, Stewie versus EDD in the first round of the playoffs. Are you kidding me? Oh my God.
That'd be so great. And let's see what Tina Charles does for them,
Yes. And as our MAP reported over the weekend, going to be very interesting to see what Tina Charles does for them or, against them, according to some members of the Phoenix Mercury. Well, I want to talk about this up and coming. I mean, again, like, few people have heard of her. She doesn't really get a lot of press, but Candace Parker is someone who I think we need to put a spotlight on. But first, I want to talk to you about BetOnline, because betonline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. And I know I've talked about this on the podcast, but it bears repeating. BetOnline.net has had NCAA women's basketball odds. They have WNBA odds. They are not just giving you men's sports the way you see a lot of these betting line companies do. It is your continued sports source for, and they say, all your sports wagering info right here in the ad copy. But I love that I'm able to say that, because I couldn't look you in the eye and tell you that. Live betting, esports, scores, they remain your best spot to check out all your favorite sports and events. And we have favorite sports and events that don't always get that treatment. So it means a lot to me. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet online, where the game starts. So again, this Candace Parker person, tell me more. I'm just, not really familiar, but it seems like she's doing well for you, for the Chicago Sky, right? Is she a guard? Is she a forward? Is she a center? It's hard to tell from, the type of line she's putting up.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up, Howard, before the podcast so I could do some research. She was drafted in 2008 and found herself on the Sky now. And yeah, she put up her second triple-double of the season, which, no, I mean, Candace is an all-time great for a reason. And it feels like anytime there's a big moment where she can send a message to the league or to whoever, I mean, I think about that All-Star game voting and how the players voted for her. I'm like, wow. I don't know how you could watch this season and not think that she is a WNBA All-Star, but again, the politics in that is something we don't have to get into now. What she did against the Sparks was just incredible because the part of the triple-double that she was struggling to get to was points. Like she was already she was throwing the ball around across the court against the Sparks early on. I think she had 9 rebounds after the first quarter or something crazy like that. And she ended up getting a triple-double without even having to play in the fourth. So it's pretty incredible what she's been able to do at her age right now. And it makes you wonder if she is going to retire after this season. Like I think about after the first triple-double, even honestly, even beyond that, even after the first few games of the season where she actually looks like an MVP candidate too, I'm like, how can you leave the game of basketball when you're playing at this high of a level? And the difference between her on the court defensively for the Sky versus her off the court, I mean, it's a pretty big difference. Excuse me. It's a pretty big difference where heading into that Aces game, I mean, the Sky had a 92.6 defensive rating with her on the court versus 103 without her. I mean, the difference between her being on and off the court is pretty big. So what she did against the Sparks, against her former team, just incredible stuff. Just another thing to add to her long list of accolades.
Some other players clearly don't like her. I remember a few years ago, The Athletic had a most overrated player vote, and Parker was the most overrated player voted for that back in her Sparks days. A couple things I just want to note about it because I have a deep abiding love for the fact that we got the chance to cover Candace Parker's career, and it's something that I think is going to matter to future generations that we were able to do that. One is that I remember standing with her, talking one-on-one in Connecticut in a time that it seemed like Candace Parker's career was headed towards an unsatisfying conclusion. The fact that she was not fully appreciated for the player she had become. The Athletic piece had come out earlier that year, and the Sparks obviously were not putting the right team around her. And so to see her be able to have this type of coda on her career, whether she plays beyond this year or not, and I hope she does, just selfishly, because the basketball is better when Candace Parker is in it. In the same way that selfishly you hope when you're watching the NBA that Candace Parker is involved with the broadcast in some way, because she runs circles around a lot of the other people who do that work. But seeing her do this to cap a career, like you said, I mean, there's this great irony. You talked about she did that against the Sparks. One of my favorite stat facts about Candace Parker is she once led the WNBA in assist percentage, the league, not among bigs. She led the league. Her assist percentage, I want to say, was 42 one year, simply because the Sparks hadn't done a competent job of putting a team around her, and she was effectively needed to be their point guard. And Parker has been this throughout her career. So there's a different year where she led the league in rebounding percentage. There was a different year than either of those where she led the league in block percentage. And she simply, I almost feel like the Sparks took advantage of that to an unfortunate extent for many years. And rather than build a team to maximize Candace Parker, it was building a team and then you just plug in Candace Parker wherever the team had its own shortcomings. And I don't think as a result, it was not surprising that she didn't win a title for the first 7-8 years of her career, yet that was hung around her neck. Like that was somehow her fault instead of the team that was being put around her. So seeing her get this opportunity and see again, I just feel like James Wade has built this roster to maximize Candace in a way that I know Mike Tebow did in DC, maximized his roster around Elena Delle Donne's prime in much the same way. The complications in DC, of course, have been Elena's limitations in terms of how often she is available. But seeing Candace healthy, available, and playing at this high level, boy, it sure would be great if we got to see her beyond this year. But certainly we're getting the opportunity to this year already, and that means a lot.
Yeah, I feel like I catch myself trying not to think too much about next year, even with the Phoenix Mercury pick that this guy have, where you're seeing the Mercury, they just lost Tina Charles, who was like at least putting up points for them. And now, I mean, that team is, I don't know where it's going to go after this. I know they're trying to remain positive, but, I try to catch myself not to get too far ahead because the Sky are really just focused on this season. Like anytime I bring up next season to them, they're like, we are focused on winning a championship, James. Stop asking me about this stuff, So, yeah, I like to think that we'll see Candace in a Sky uniform, but I'm just trying to enjoy it as much as we can before, she calls it a career, whether that's next year or beyond that.
A thing I try to do as a reporter is every time I go in to see one of these truly transcendent players to understand this might be the last time I get to. Now in some cases, like when I covered Sue Bird's return to New York last weekend, you have warning and you understand that. But look, I walked out of the 2019 WNBA finals when Elena Delle Donne had been crowned a champion, and it didn't even occur to me that I would go years without being able to see her perform in person. And, it is just the case again and again with these players. And so I think you have the right handle on it, in much the same way that, over in, sorry, I'm just trying to look it up. In the NBA, apparently there are transcendent players that I've heard about, like Steph Curry is apparently a player in this league, may have won a championship just now. And so I do want to thank you, listeners, for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. But I do want to bring your attention to this. There's been a draft held in the NBA, which is the National Basketball Association, a place where men are at long last getting the chance to play professionally. And so for your second listen, I would urge you to get up to date on the latest news and rumors in the NBA in just 30 minutes every day with Locked On NBA. Locked On NBA is your daily NBA update in just 30 minutes. They've got free agency coming up, which, as I understand it, they've structured similarly to how the WNBA does it from February 1st, that their July 1st is like the WNBA's February 1st. So it should be interesting. James, I hear, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's an NBA team right in your market, right in your hometown, right?
I would have to Google it, but that sounds right. And the Steph Curry guy you mentioned before, I'll have to Google that one too. Does
he play for it's the Bulls, the Chicago Bulls? Does he play for them?
I'm going to just go with yes. I don't know off the top of my head, but that sounds right. Yeah, he plays for the Chicago Bulls. Yeah,
I just Googled it. It doesn't sound like, no, but they did. The Bulls had this Allie Quigley-like person named Michael Jordan some years ago, who apparently did quite well. So
wow, yeah. Michael Jordan is the Allie Quigley of the NBA. That sounds about right.
What I've been led to understand. Well, James K., I appreciate all of your women's basketball knowledge and here even some men's basketball stuff too, which is great to see. And we kid, we love the NBA. It's a perfectly logical way to get from one WNBA season to another. So thank you for your time, everyone. Make sure you're following him. If you're not watching on YouTube, I want to shout it out at James_M_K. He is always worth your time, and I am grateful for the chance to work with you every day, James.
Same here, Howard. Thank you so much for having me on again.
My pleasure. And make sure you tune in tomorrow for Tina Charles and Seattle Storm Talk with Em Adler and Alex Simon. Until then, I am Howard Megdal, wishing you a wonderful Monday.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.